What's your best example of the road to hell is paved with good intentions? I was walking up a random street when an old lady I'd never seen before tapped my shoulder. "Excuse me, young man. You look big and strong. Could you please come inside my house and be my bodyguard?" My head snapped back in confusion. The lady was almost crying. "My ex-husband has anger issues. He broke my kneecap last year." She lifted her leg, showing a brace. "He's coming in an hour to take our dead son's wedding ring and sell it. He can't have my baby's wedding ring." I looked at her tear-stained eyes and frail frame. I knew I couldn't leave her alone. I took her hand and told her to lead the way. Inside, she locked the deadbolt behind us. "Thank you. I'm Margaret." She showed me her phone, threatening texts from Harold. "I'm doing what's for the best. Don't try anything stupid. He knows I have the rings in the safe upstairs," Margaret explained, voice shaking. "Our son died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Those rings are all I have left." She pointed to a folded flag on the mantel. "Harold wants to sell them for gambling money. He's already sold James's medals, his car, everything else." Margaret led me to the living room. "Just sit here where he can see you through the window. Maybe he won't even come in if he sees a man here." We started making small talk, but then I noticed a framed photo on the mantel. Margaret with a much younger man, early 20s, arms interlinked, both smiling. She saw me looking and quickly turned it around. "That's my nephew. We're very close." Another text came at 3:20 p.m. "She better be ready when I get there." "She?" I asked. "The safe," Margaret said quickly. "He calls it she. Military thing." I was already on edge when a door creaked upstairs, but Margaret stayed calm. "That's just the house settling," she said. I stood up. "I think I should go," but Margaret grabbed my arm, tears suddenly streaming. "Please, he sent me this last month." She showed me a photo on her phone, a woman with a black eye and split lip. "That's his ex-girlfriend. She tried to get a restraining order. Look what happened." I sat back down. I couldn't leave her to face that. But 10 minutes later, Harold sent a voice message. "You think you're so smart. I have all the evidence. Everything." Margaret started pacing. In her kitchen, I saw a birthday cake box. It was a fresh cake, labeled "Happy 14th Birthday, Fen." Margaret appeared behind me instantly. "That cake is from last week. Neighbor's daughter. They had the party here, 3:35 p.m. Another photo from Harold of some legal documents. "Judge agrees with me. I have rights." Margaret was sweating now. "He got a court order for the rings, but they're not his. They're James's." I was racking my brain wondering what the hell was happening. That's when I noticed teen magazines on the coffee table, half hidden under newspapers. A pink phone case peeking out from under the couch cushion. "Margaret, whose stuff is this really? I'm not comfortable. Please." She pulled up her sleeve, showing old bruises. "These are from last month. If you leave, he'll do worse. He always does worse when I'm alone." The bruises looked real. So I stayed. 3:40 p.m. 15 minutes. Better not have corrupted her mind with more lies. The way he said, "corrupted her mind," made my skin crawl. Margaret's hands were shaking violently now. A text notification sound came from upstairs, not Margaret's ringtone. She practically ran to the stairs. "Just checking the windows are locked." But right as she came down, through the back window, I saw someone in a black hoodie sneaking out, jumping over the fence and running away. "I'm calling the police," I said, pulling out my phone. "No!" Margaret knocked my phone from my hand. "They'll take 30 minutes to get here. He's here right now, and when they leave, he comes back. He always comes back. Please, just stay." That's when Harold's final text came through. "I'm here. I can see him through the window. You've really done it now." A car door slammed. Margaret positioned me directly in front of the door. "Whatever happens, just remember, you're protecting an old woman from her abusive ex." The doorknob started turning. "Jennifer!" The voice behind the door screamed out. "I know you're both in there, and Fen is too." "Huh? Jennifer?" I asked Margaret. Her whole act crumbled. She grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Just play along, please." The door opened fully. A man in a leather jacket stood there, phone in one hand, recording. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. He looked at Margaret with pure disgust, then at me. His face was furious. "So you're the 24-year-old Fen's been meeting?" He pointed at me. "What? No, I'm just—" A girl's voice from upstairs suddenly cut through mine. "This is why Mom won't let you in the house, Dad. You don't understand mine and Ben's relationship." I spun to Margaret. "What is she talking about?" That's when I put the pieces together. There was no dead son, no wedding rings. Margaret was Jennifer. She'd been hiding her 14-year-old daughter's adult boyfriend in the house. When Harold said he was coming to get his daughter, she panicked. She grabbed me off the street to be a decoy. If Harold found a strange man in the house, he would assume he was the boyfriend. This was now me. The real predator had slipped out the back while I stood there like an idiot. Harold was already on the phone with 911, describing me, telling them to come now. Harold pushed through the door while keeping his phone pressed to his ear, still talking to the 911 operator about me being in the house with his daughter. Jennifer's fingers dug into my arm so hard I felt her nails through my shirt as she leaned close and whispered that I had to play along, or Harold would hurt them both. I yanked my arm away from her and stepped toward Harold, telling him loudly that I'd never met his daughter before today, and this woman pulled me off the street an hour ago. Harold kept his phone camera pointed at my face while shouting that he had proof, that neighbors had seen me here before, that I was going to jail for what I'd done. My eyes darted to the back window where I'd seen the hooded figure jumping the fence just minutes ago, and the reality hit me hard that Jennifer had set me up to take the fall while the real guy got away clean. The sound of police sirens grew louder outside, and I had maybe 30 seconds to decide whether to run out the back door or stay and try to explain this insane situation. Running would make me look guilty as hell, so I planted myself in the middle of the living room with my hands visible and got ready to tell the cops exactly what happened. 2 officers burst through the front door with their hands on their weapons, ordering everyone to show their hands and stay exactly where they were. I raised my hands immediately above my head, while Harold kept pointing at me and shouting that I was the one who'd been meeting his daughter. The lead officer told Harold to lower his phone and step back while his partner moved between us, keeping one hand near his gun. They separated us quickly into different rooms, with Harold going to the kitchen, Jennifer to the dining room, and me staying in the living room with the first officer watching me. From upstairs, I heard Fen yelling something about her parents not understanding, and the second officer headed up the stairs to check on her. The officer with me asked for my ID, and I pulled out my wallet slowly, explaining how Jennifer had grabbed me off the street claiming she needed protection from her violent ex-husband. I told him about the fake story with the dead son and wedding rings, the bruises she showed me, how I saw someone in a black hoodie escape through the back right before Harold arrived. The officer wrote everything down in his notepad, while Harold's voice carried from the kitchen, and I could hear him showing the other cop something on his phone. Through the doorway, I saw Harold pull out folded papers from his jacket, his hands shaking as he showed them to the officer, who started reading through what looked like court documents. Jennifer's voice rose from the dining room, crying about how Harold had hurt her before, and I watched her pull up her sleeve to show the bruises to that officer. The cop with her asked when exactly Harold had given her those bruises, and I heard her pause before giving a different timeline than what she'd told me earlier. My officer noticed the birthday cake box on the kitchen counter and walked over to examine it, then pointed out the teen magazines on the coffee table to his partner. The pink phone case under the couch cushion caught his attention next, and he pulled on latex gloves before picking it up and dropping it into an evidence bag. He radioed for CPS backup, telling dispatch they had a situation involving a minor who might be in danger and needed someone from child services immediately. The officer in the kitchen was taking photos of Harold's documents, while Harold kept insisting he had custody rights, and Jennifer had been hiding his daughter from him. Jennifer shouted from the dining room that Harold was lying, that he'd been violent before, but when pressed for specific dates, her story kept changing. I stayed quiet in the living room, keeping my hands visible while the officer bagged more items, including some energy drinks from the counter that definitely weren't mine. Fen's voice drifted down from upstairs where she was arguing with the officer, saying something about Ben being 24, but that age was just a number. My stomach turned when I realized this 14-year-old kid really thought she was in a relationship with an adult man who'd been in this house. The officer with me asked if I'd seen this Ben person, and I described the figure in the black hoodie who'd jumped the fence right before Harold arrived. He immediately radioed that information to dispatch, describing a possible suspect who'd fled the scene on foot, heading west from the residence. Harold's voice cracked as he told his officer about finding text messages between Ben and Fen, discovering his ex-wife had been letting this adult man stay overnight with their daughter. The situation was becoming clearer to everyone that Jennifer had grabbed me as a decoy when she knew Harold was coming to get Fen and expose what was happening. My officer asked if I wanted to press charges for false imprisonment, since Jennifer had essentially kidnapped me off the street and held me here under false pretenses. I told him I just wanted to go home, but would cooperate fully with whatever investigation they needed to do to protect that kid upstairs. More sirens approached, and through the window, I saw another patrol car pull up along with an unmarked sedan that had government plates. The cops were taking this seriously now that they understood a minor was involved with an adult, and the mother had been enabling it. I pointed toward the back window and told the officer about the guy in the black hoodie who jumped the fence just minutes before Harold showed up. The officer immediately radioed for someone to check the backyard while I explained how Jennifer had knocked my phone away when I tried to call 911 after seeing him. Another officer headed outside with a flashlight even though it was still daylight, checking the grass near the fence where I'd seen the figure escape. He waved from the yard and called that there were fresh sneaker prints in the dirt, deep ones like someone had been running hard, and the fence had scuff marks where someone had clearly climbed over. The officer with me asked if I wanted to call a lawyer since this was getting complicated. I said I'd cooperate fully, but would like to have one on standby if they were planning to charge me with anything. He shook his head and said I wasn't under arrest. They just needed to figure out what was really going on here. Right then, Fenn's voice carried down from upstairs, loud and angry, telling the officer up there that Ben was her boyfriend and her parents just didn't get true love. The officers in the living room looked at each other with that expression cops get when they realize things are worse than they thought, and one grabbed his radio to call for a detective who worked these kinds of cases. Harold heard his daughter's words from the kitchen and lost it completely, shouting Ben's name and trying to push past the officer to get to the stairs. The cop had to physically grab Harold's shoulders and push him back against the wall, telling him to calm down or he'd be in cuffs too. Harold's face was red, and the veins in his neck were standing out as he kept yelling about what he was going to do to Ben when he found him, which wasn't helping his case with the cops who were already writing everything down. The officer who'd been upstairs came down carrying the pink phone case in a clear evidence bag, saying he'd called a judge for a verbal warrant and gotten permission to seize it. He said the phone was locked, but their tech people could get into it, and it would probably have all the messages between this Ben guy and the kid. 20 minutes into this mess, a sergeant walked in wearing a suit instead of a uniform, introducing himself as Greg Snyder. He went straight to the officers who'd arrived first, watching their body cam footage on one of their phones, nodding as he got caught up on the situation. Greg started pointing and giving orders like he'd done this 100 times before, assigning one officer to stay with each adult, another to keep bagging evidence, and one more to watch the street in case the suspect came back. That's when the neighbor from next door showed up at the front door, an older woman who said her name was Ellen Eves. She told Greg she'd seen someone in a black hoodie running from Jennifer's backyard about half an hour ago, right around the time I'd said. Ellen pulled out her phone and said she had one of those doorbell cameras that recorded everything, and it might have caught the guy. Greg took her phone, and we all crowded around to watch the footage, which was surprisingly clear for such a small screen. The timestamp at the bottom showed 3:42 p.m., and there he was, a young guy, maybe mid-20s, coming out of Jennifer's back gate and jogging down the alley. You could see his face for maybe 2 seconds before he turned away, but it was enough to prove I'd been telling the truth about someone else being in the house. Greg immediately sent the video to his phone and started the process to get it into evidence, telling Ellen she'd need to come to the station later to give a formal statement. Another car pulled up outside, and a woman in business clothes got out carrying a briefcase and a tablet. She walked in like she owned the place, introducing herself as Layla Joyner from Child Protective Services. Layla told everyone she needed to assess Fenn's safety immediately and would be interviewing each person separately, starting with the child in a neutral location away from both parents. She went upstairs, and I could hear her talking to Fenn in this calm, professional voice, not pushing, but not backing down either. After a few minutes, Layla brought Fenn downstairs and announced they were going next door to Ellen's house to talk, where Fenn wouldn't feel pressured by either parent watching. Jennifer started to object, but Layla shut her down with a look that could have frozen water, saying this was standard protocol when a minor might be in danger. In Ellen's living room, which I could partially see through the window, Layla sat on the couch next to Fenn instead of across from her, creating a less confrontational setup. She had Fenn show her photos on her phone first, just casual stuff to build trust, before gradually steering the conversation toward Ben. Layla took notes on her tablet the whole time, but made it look natural, like she was just keeping track of details rather than building a case. Even from across the yard, I could see Fenn gradually relaxing, her shoulders dropping as she started to open up about whatever had been going on with this Ben character. Through the window, I watched Fenn's body language change as she talked to Layla, her hands moving around more and more as she got comfortable. After about 15 minutes, Layla came back with Fenn trailing behind her, the girl's face red and puffy from crying, but also looking somehow relieved. Fenn sat down on the couch and started talking fast about how Ben was 24, but he understood her better than anyone else ever had. She explained how her mom had let them meet at the park first, then at the mall, then eventually he started coming over when her dad wasn't supposed to pick her up. Jennifer tried to interrupt, but Greg held up his hand to stop her, while Layla typed everything into her tablet, documenting dates and times when Jennifer had knowingly let this adult man spend time with her 14-year-old daughter. The more Fenn talked, the more it became clear this wasn't just a custody dispute anymore, but actual criminal child endangerment, and Jennifer's face went white as she realized how bad this looked. Greg pulled Jennifer into the kitchen for questioning, and I could hear him asking her to spell her last name for the report when she started to say M-A-R before catching herself and correcting to her actual name. Greg's voice got sharper as he realized she'd given me a completely fake identity and had planned this whole thing out, not just some panicked reaction, but an actual scheme to use me as a decoy. Harold pulled out his phone and showed Greg the temporary custody order from family court dated 2 weeks ago, which Jennifer immediately started arguing didn't cover today specifically. One of the officers called dispatch to verify the order, and within minutes they confirmed it was valid, and Harold had every legal right to pick up his daughter today. Layla stood up and announced that based on everything she'd heard and the immediate danger to Fen, she was placing the girl under CPS protective hold for tonight at minimum. Neither parent would get her until a proper safety plan was established, and both had been fully evaluated. The officers who'd been watching me this whole time finally came over and unlocked my handcuffs, saying the evidence clearly showed I was just an innocent victim of Jennifer's scheme. They asked if I'd be willing to stay and give a formal recorded statement, even though I wasn't a suspect anymore, and I agreed, because I wanted everything on record about how this crazy woman had pulled me into her mess. They set up a camera in the dining room and had me walk through every single detail from the moment Jennifer stopped me on the street pretending to be Margaret. Greg took notes and pointed out how she'd specifically picked someone who looked big and strong enough to be a believable threat to Harold, how she'd rehearsed this whole sob story about a dead son and wedding rings. Harold came over with his phone again, this time showing Greg actual text messages from Ben's phone that he'd managed to screenshot before Jennifer blocked him. The messages were full of adult language and classic manipulation tactics, telling Fen she was mature for her age and that their love was special and secret. Everyone in the room looked uncomfortable reading them because the grooming patterns were so obvious and textbook it made your skin crawl. Ellen came back inside saying she'd reviewed more of her doorbell camera footage and found something important. The video showed not just the guy in the hoodie, but also caught a partial license plate on a car parked down the street that hadn't been there earlier. You could also see a distinctive dent on the rear bumper that would make it easy to identify if they found the car. Greg immediately got on his radio and put out a bolo alert for any vehicle matching that partial plate and description, emphasizing this was connected to a child endangerment case. Within 10 minutes, dispatch called back saying they'd found 3 possible matches for that partial plate combination in the county database. Units were already being sent to each registered address to look for a car with that specific dent on the bumper. Jennifer suddenly changed her whole story, now claiming Harold had made everything up about Ben to get custody, and that she'd never heard of anyone by that name. But Layla pointed out that Jennifer kept trying to coach Fen through the doorway earlier, telling her what to say, which completely destroyed any credibility she might have had left. They decided to move Fen's interview to a completely neutral location at the Child Advocacy Center downtown, where neither parent could influence her. In the car, Fen opened up even more to Layla about how her mom had told her exactly what to say if anyone ever asked about Ben, including denying he existed and claiming any men around the house were just repair workers or relatives. The officers searching upstairs came down with evidence bags full of men's toiletries, energy drinks, and even a phone charger that definitely wasn't mine or Harold's. They photographed everything and bagged items that might have DNA evidence to prove Ben had been staying in the house regularly with Jennifer's knowledge and permission. My phone started buzzing in my pocket, and I pulled it out to see texts from coworkers asking if I was okay, because someone had posted Harold's video on Facebook. Jennifer saw the cops looking at the evidence bags, and suddenly her whole story changed completely. She started telling Greg that Harold made everything up about some guy named Ben because he wanted full custody and would say anything to get it. But while she was talking, she kept trying to yell instructions through the doorway to Fen upstairs, telling her what to say and how to answer questions. Layla noticed this right away and wrote something in her notebook, then whispered to Greg, who nodded and made a decision. They needed to get Fen away from both parents to do a proper interview, so Layla suggested using Ellen's living room next door, since it was neutral territory. Ellen agreed immediately and helped Layla walk Fen over, while both parents had to stay behind with different officers. Once they got to Ellen's house, Fen seemed to relax without her mom and dad fighting nearby. She sat on Ellen's couch and started opening up to Layla about how her mom had coached her for months about keeping Ben a secret. Her mom said it was to protect their special relationship from people who wouldn't understand true love between souls. Fen explained how her mom gave her exact scripts to memorize if anyone ever asked about Ben. She was supposed to say he didn't exist, that any man seen at the house was a repair worker or her uncle visiting. Her mom even made her practice the lies in front of a mirror to make them sound natural. Meanwhile, the officers searching upstairs came down with more evidence bags from the back bedroom. They'd found men's deodorant, shaving cream, energy drinks, and a phone charger that definitely wasn't mine or Harold's based on the brand. They photographed everything carefully and bagged items that might have Ben's DNA, like a toothbrush and razor they found in the bathroom. My phone rang, and it was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. It was a public defender named Siobhan McKenzie, who said she'd gotten my number from the police station after I'd asked for legal help earlier. She told me not to give any more statements without her present and to start documenting any damages from the false accusations spreading online. She said she'd meet me tomorrow morning to go over my options for defamation claims against both Jennifer and Harold. Layla was taking photos of the house conditions with her phone, focusing on the birthday cake that proved Jennifer had lied about the timeline. The cake was fresh, not from last week like she'd claimed, and the receipt was still in the trash showing today's date. She also photographed the teen magazines, the pink phone case, and other evidence that a teenage girl lived here, not some elderly woman with a dead son. The evidence of child endangerment kept piling up with every room they checked. Greg got a call on his radio that made him step outside for better reception. When he came back in, he announced that the partial license plate from Ellen's camera had led to an address across town. A car matching the description with the right dent was parked outside an apartment complex. Officers were setting up surveillance and waiting for someone to approach the vehicle so they could make a positive ID. Harold was sitting in the kitchen with another officer, and I could hear him admitting that he'd been in anger management classes before. He wasn't proud of his temper and knew it made him look bad, but he swore he'd never physically hurt Jennifer, despite what she claimed. He said his temper was verbal only, and he was working on it, but finding out about Ben had pushed him past his breaking point because his daughter's safety was at stake. Jennifer must have heard him, because she suddenly broke down crying in the dining room. She started telling her officer that she'd been so scared of losing Fen in the custody battle that she'd made bad choices. She admitted she knew Ben was too old for Fen, but convinced herself he was good for her daughter because he made Fen happy and didn't seem violent or aggressive. She thought if Fen had someone who loved her, it would help her through the divorce, and she'd been so desperate to keep her daughter that she'd ignored all the red flags. Layla came back from Ellen's house with pages of notes from Fen's interview. She pulled Greg aside, and they had a quick conference. Then Layla made some phone calls. Within 20 minutes, she announced that CPS was creating an emergency safety plan for tonight. Fen would be placed with Harold under supervision from a family friend the court approved. Jennifer would only get supervised visits at the CPS office until a full investigation was completed. The judge had already signed the emergency order based on the evidence of endangerment. Jennifer started screaming that they couldn't take her baby away, but Layla calmly explained this was temporary and for Fen's protection while they investigated. Harold would have to follow strict rules too, including continuing his anger management and allowing home visits from CPS. The placement would be reviewed in 72 hours at an emergency hearing. Officers started packing up their evidence while Layla helped Fen gather some clothes and personal items from her room. Greg walked over to me while the other officers were busy with evidence bags and handed me my phone back from where Jennifer had knocked it to the floor earlier. He told me I was free to go, but they'd probably need me as a witness down the road since the whole case had shifted from me being some kind of predator to me being the victim of Jennifer, basically holding me here under false pretenses. I grabbed my phone and noticed Harold standing in the corner looking at his own phone with his face going white. He showed Greg his screen where the video he'd taken of me when he first burst through the door was already spreading on local Facebook groups with people sharing it and commenting about catching a predator in the act. Harold tried deleting it from his account, but screenshots were already everywhere, and someone had even posted it to Twitter, where it was getting hundreds of retweets. My stomach dropped as I realized my face was now connected to child predator accusations all over the internet, even though I was completely innocent of everything. Greg told Harold he needed to post a correction immediately, but we all knew how these things work online, where the lie travels halfway around the world before the truth gets its shoes on. I walked outside into the late afternoon sun and immediately noticed the neighbors standing in their driveways and front yards, staring at me and whispering to each other. Some had their phones out recording me walking to my car, and I heard one woman tell her kid to get inside the house right now. The damage to my reputation had already started spreading through the neighborhood like wildfire, and I knew these people would always wonder if there was more to the story, even after the truth came out. My phone rang, and it was the public defender's office returning my earlier call, so I drove to a coffee shop downtown to meet with someone named Siobhan, who specialized in these kinds of cases. She was already sitting at a corner table with a laptop and legal pad when I walked in, and she immediately started asking me questions about everything that happened. She explained I had solid grounds for both defamation and false imprisonment claims against Jennifer, and possibly even Harold, for the video he posted without checking facts first. She started typing up notes and said she'd contact Facebook and Twitter and TikTok right away with takedown notices, but warned me that once something goes viral, it's almost impossible to completely remove it from the internet. While we were talking, her phone buzzed with a text from someone at the prosecutor's office, saying the surveillance team watching that car with the dent had just spotted someone approaching the vehicle. The person matched the description of Ben from the hoodie and everything, and when they made the traffic stop, the driver had Fen's picture as his phone wallpaper, which was pretty damning evidence. The officers got a warrant for the phone within an hour, and when they did an initial review, they found hundreds of messages between him and Fen going back 6 months. The timestamps on the messages matched perfectly with times when Jennifer had claimed Fen was at the school activities or sleepovers with friends, but was actually meeting up with this guy. Some of the messages were explicit enough that the detective stopped reading them out loud during the briefing because they made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Greg called me while I was still at the coffee shop to update me that they'd arrested the real suspect, and he wanted to thank me for staying calm during the whole mess. He said things could have gone really bad if I'd tried to run when Harold showed up, or if I'd gotten physical with anyone, because then I'd be facing charges, even if I was innocent of the main accusation. He admitted the department owed me an apology for how long it took to sort out the truth, but said my cooperation made their job easier and helped them catch the actual predator who'd been grooming Fen. Meanwhile, Layla was making arrangements for Fen to have a forensic interview at the Child Advocacy Center the next morning, since these specialized interviews are designed to get accurate information from kids without traumatizing them more than they already are. The interviewers are trained in child psychology and know how to ask questions in ways that don't lead the witness or plant false memories, which is crucial for building a solid case. The judge signed a protective order that afternoon, preventing Jennifer from having any unsupervised contact with Fen until the investigation was complete. Jennifer was also ordered to undergo psychological evaluation and attend parenting classes as part of the conditions for even getting supervised visits at the CPS office. The order was served on her at the house while crime scene techs were still collecting evidence, and she broke down crying and screaming that they couldn't take her baby away, but the officer serving the papers just handed them to her and left. I was driving home when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, it was someone from HR at my work. They'd seen the video online because apparently one of my coworkers follows that neighborhood Facebook group and shared it in our company Slack before anyone knew the real story. HR said they had no choice but to place me on administrative leave until everything was cleared up officially, even though they believed me when I explained what really happened. The woman on the phone sounded sympathetic, but we both knew how these things go, where even being falsely accused of something involving kids can destroy your career forever. My lawyer called back that same night and said she'd already started filing preservation letters to every social media platform where Harold's video had been shared. She explained that these legal notices would force the companies to save all the evidence, even if people deleted their posts later, which would help if we needed to sue for defamation. The next morning, she sent formal takedown requests to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, but warned me that while the original might come down, screenshots and reposts would keep spreading for weeks. She was right about that, because my cousin texted me a screenshot from a parenting group where someone had posted my photo with a warning about local predators. Meanwhile, the forensic interview with Fen happened at the Child Advocacy Center downtown, where they have special rooms with cameras and trained interviewers who know how to talk to kids about this stuff. The interviewer spent 2 hours with Fen, and what came out was worse than anyone expected. Fen told them Ben had been coming around for 6 months, first as her mom's friend, who would bring them groceries and help with yard work. Then he started taking special interest in Fen, buying her makeup and clothes that were way too grown up for a 14-year-old. Jennifer knew about everything, and even helped hide the stuff from Harold by keeping it in her own closet. Fen described secret meetings at the park, where Ben would pick her up after school, while her mom covered by saying she was at soccer practice. The worst part was when Fen admitted Ben had been telling her they'd run away together when she turned 16, and her mom had actually been helping them plan it. The detective called me later to update me that based on the interview and the messages on Ben's phone, the district attorney was filing multiple charges, including child enticement, unlawful sexual conduct with a minor, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. They set his bail at $200,000 because of the flight risk and the fact that he'd already tried to run once. The judge also issued a no-contact order that meant Ben couldn't come within 500 feet of Fen or try to communicate with her in any way. 2 days later, the police department finally put out an official statement clearing my name and explaining that I was actually a victim who'd been used as a decoy. But that press release got maybe 1/10 of the attention that Harold's original video got, and I kept getting messages from people saying they didn't buy it and there must be more to the story. My neighbor knocked on my door to tell me she believed me, but warned that some people on the neighborhood Facebook page were still calling me suspicious. The emergency family court hearing happened that Thursday, and the judge didn't waste any time after hearing the evidence. Harold got temporary full custody immediately, with Jennifer only allowed supervised visits at the CPS office for 2 hours every other week. The judge ordered both parents to attend therapy and parenting classes, and Fen had to start seeing a trauma counselor twice a week. Jennifer's lawyer tried to argue that she was just trying to be a supportive mother, but the judge shut that down fast, saying that enabling a predator wasn't support, it was child endangerment. The criminal charges against Jennifer came the next week and included child endangerment, obstruction of justice, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Her lawyer worked out a deal where she could enter a diversion program instead of going to jail, but she had to complete 200 hours of community service, 18 months of counseling, and follow every single requirement, or the charges would be filed again. The conditions were strict too, like she couldn't be alone with any minor, including Fen, had to submit to random drug tests, and had to attend a support group for parents of exploited children. That's when the anonymous threats started showing up at my apartment building. Someone slipped a note under my landlord's door saying he was harboring a child predator, and they'd make sure everyone in the building knew about it. Another person spray-painted pedo on the dumpster near my parking spot, though the building's security camera didn't catch who did it. My landlord called me into his office and said he believed I was innocent, but other tenants were complaining, and he might have to ask me to leave if things got worse. Ellen from Jennifer's street heard about what was happening and organized something that actually helped a little bit. She got 5 other neighbors to write sworn statements about seeing Ben around the house for months before I ever showed up, and one of them even had doorbell camera footage of Ben arriving at the house dating back 4 months. They sent all of this to the police, the district attorney, and posted it on that same neighborhood Facebook page where people were calling me suspicious. It didn't fix everything, but at least some people started to understand that I really was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. HR finally called me back and said I could return to work, but only part-time at first, while they completed their own investigation. My first day back was brutal, because everyone was polite but distant, like they were scared to be seen talking to me too much. People who used to eat lunch with me suddenly had meetings during lunch hour, and conversations stopped when I walked into the break room. My boss pulled me aside and said she knew this was hard, but I needed to keep my head down and let my work speak for itself. The status hearing for the custody case happened 3 weeks later, and Harold showed up with proof that he'd been attending anger management classes twice a week. He told the judge he knew his temper had been a problem in the past, but he was committed to being better for Fen, and his counselor submitted a report saying he was making real progress. Jennifer also showed the judge she'd enrolled in parenting classes and was seeing a therapist twice a week about how she'd enabled Ben's access to Fen. The judge ordered Fen to start therapy too, and her first few sessions were rough, according to what Harold told me later. The therapist had Fen write letters she didn't have to send, and apparently she wrote pages and pages to Ben about how confused and angry she felt. She also texted Harold constantly during those first weeks, sometimes mad at him for breaking them up, sometimes grateful he'd protected her, mostly just confused about everything. 2 weeks after the custody hearing, Jennifer had her first supervised visit with Fen at the CPS office downtown. I heard about it from Ellen, who still kept in touch since she felt bad about everything that happened to me. She said Jennifer showed up early and waited in the parking lot for an hour before going in, and the visit only lasted 30 minutes because Fen didn't want to talk much. The CPS worker had to sit in the room the whole time, and Jennifer could only talk about safe topics like school and friends, nothing about Ben or what happened. Around that same time, the prosecutor's office called me to come give a witness statement about what I saw that day. I kept my answers short and stuck to the facts about being pulled off the street and seeing someone run out the back. The prosecutor said my testimony probably wouldn't be needed since they had so much other evidence, but they wanted it on record just in case. I signed the statement and left as fast as I could, not wanting any more involvement than necessary. 3 days later, Harold posted a video online trying to fix the mess he'd created with that first recording of me. He explained how Jennifer had tricked me into being there and asked people to stop sending threats to my apartment. Most of the comments were supportive, and people said they understood his panic as a father, but the damage was already done since the internet never forgets anything. My landlord had already given me notice to move out by the end of the month, even though the threats had mostly stopped. A few weeks passed, and I had to drive near that neighborhood for a work delivery, so I went past the house just to see. New locks on all the doors, security cameras mounted on every corner, motion lights installed around the whole yard. The place looked normal and quiet with no sign of the chaos from that day, just another house on a regular street. I found out later that week that Ben took a plea deal to avoid trial. 5 years in prison, lifetime registration as a sex offender, and no contact with minors ever again, including Fen. The prosecutor told me it wasn't enough for what he did, but at least Fen wouldn't have to testify and relive everything in court. Harold texted me the news and thanked me again for not running that day, even though it cost me so much. By the end of that first month, Jennifer was reporting real progress in her counseling, according to the court documents I saw later. Her therapist wrote that she was starting to understand how her fear of losing custody made her ignore obvious warning signs about Ben. She'd completed all her parenting classes and drug tests, and the counselor said she was taking responsibility for enabling the abuse. Fen had agreed to start joint therapy sessions with her mom the following month, which everyone said was a good sign for their relationship, maybe healing someday. My boss finally cleared me to return to my full schedule after HR finished their investigation and found no evidence I'd done anything wrong. Work felt different, though, because people were still careful around me. Conversations still got quiet when I walked by. Lunch invitations never quite came anymore. I started eating in my car and keeping to myself mostly, just doing my job and going home without the small talk and jokes from before. Life settled into this new, weird normal where I checked doorbell cameras before helping anyone, avoided being alone with strangers, and definitely never went into anyone's house no matter how much they seemed to need help. The whole thing taught me that trying to be a good person could destroy your life in minutes if you weren't careful. Every time I thought about that day, I felt grateful that Harold caught the real predator and Fen was getting help, but I also felt angry about losing my apartment, my reputation, and my sense of safety in the world. Sometimes I'd see a post online with my face from that original video and have to report it again, knowing it would keep popping up forever no matter what. At least everyone involved was in a better place than before, even if my life would never quite go back to normal. Thanks for hanging out with me and just kind of wondering through all this together. Hopefully some of your own questions get answered along the way too. Take care, and hey, like the video, it helps more than you think.